Okay, so just imagine for a second. Your country has just lost a world war. Your empire, which has stood for centuries, has completely crumbled. And now foreign armies are marching through the streets of your capital. That was the stark reality for the Turkish people back in 1918. But from those exact ashes, a brand new nation was about to rise. Today, we're diving into that incredible fight for survival, the Turkish War of Independence.
The year is 1918. You're in Istanbul. The air is thick with the smoke from foreign warships just sitting there in the harbor. The Ottoman Empire, once so mighty, is gone. And for most people, it feels like the end of the world. But for one man, an Ottoman general named Mustafa Kemal, looking out at those very same ships, well, for him, it's a call to action. And he makes this promise, this defiant promise that just cuts through all the gloom. They will go as they have come. So you gotta ask, right? How does a nation go from being on the absolute brink of disappearing to becoming a new republic? That is the heart of our story today. It's a journey against impossible odds, guided by brilliant leadership and fueled by the unshakable spirit of a people who just flat out refused to be erased from the map. To really get what they were up against, you have to understand the situation after World War I. For the Ottoman Empire, it wasn't just a military defeat. It was basically a death sentence. The winning Allied powers were hungry for territory, and they started carving up the empire like it was a feast. And it all kicks off with this document, the Armistice of Mudros. Now, on paper, it was a ceasefire, but in reality, it was less of a peace treaty and more of a blank check for the Allies. See, there was this one key clause that gave them the right to occupy any territory they felt was a threat to their security, which, in their eyes, turned out to be, well, pretty much all of it. And this shows you the brutal reality of that blank check. This wasn't just about drawing new lines on a map somewhere in Europe. This was foreign soldiers patrolling the streets of ancient cities, foreign flags flying over their government buildings. The Turkish people were suddenly being made to feel like strangers in their very own land. But, even in the darkest moments, a little bit of hope can start to shine through. And in this case, it came from the ranks of the defeated army. His name was Mustafa Kemal. He was a decorated general, already a national hero for his strategic brilliance. And this was not a guy who knew how to surrender. Mustafa Kemal was way more than just a military genius, even though his leadership at Gallipoli had already made him famous across the country. He was this charismatic leader who could just rally people. He had a sharp political mind that could outmaneuver anyone. And, most importantly, he was a visionary. He could see a future for his people that almost no one else dared to even imagine at the time. So when he stood there, looking at those enemy warships in Istanbul and made that incredibly bold, almost reckless declaration, it was so much more than just tough talk. It was exactly the spark of defiance the demoralized Turkish people needed to hear. It was a promise that their story was not over yet. But let's be real for a second. How do you turn one man's defiant words into a national movement? The country is occupied, the army is in shambles, and the people have lost hope. On paper, this whole thing looks absolutely impossible. Mustafa Kemal knew he couldn't do this from occupied Istanbul. He had to get to the heart of Anatolia, to the people themselves. So on May 19th, 1919, he lands in the port city of Samsun, and that's where the real journey begins. From Hafsa and Amasya, he sends out these circulars, like lanterns in the dark, calling the nation to wake up and resist. Then, at the Erzurum Congress, he lays it all out. The homeland is one, and it can't be divided. And finally, in Sivas, he does the crucial work of pulling all the scattered local resistance groups together under a single unified banner. And all of this, it leads to this one crucial date, April 23rd, 1920. By setting up the Grand National Assembly in Ankara, deep in the heartland, the movement did something truly profound. It created a government in exile, inside its own country. Ankara became the new symbol of Turkish sovereignty, a real beacon of hope. And from this new capital, the war for independence would be won. So, with a new government calling the shots, the fight begins for real. But just think about the strategic nightmare they were facing. They had to fight a war on 3 separate fronts, all at the same time. I mean, they were surrounded. It's a textbook recipe for disaster. But they had no choice. They had to fight for every single inch of their homeland. All right, let's break it down. On the Eastern Front,
The Turkish army, led by the very capable General Kazım Karabekir, managed to secure a quick, decisive victory against Armenian forces. But this was so much more than just a win on the battlefield. It was a huge political breakthrough. The Treaty of Gümrük that followed was the first time any foreign power officially recognized the new government in Ankara. It was a small step, for sure, but an absolutely crucial one. Now, the Southern Front, that was a totally different kind of war. Here, against the French and Italians, there was no professional army. This was a true people's war. It was fought by farmers, merchants, local leaders, ordinary citizens they called the Kuvayi Milliye. They picked up whatever weapons they could find to defend their homes and their families. It was pure grassroots resistance.
But the biggest fight, the one where everything was on the line, was in the West, against the invading Greek army. This was the real crucible of the war. And while the local militias fought with incredible bravery, it became pretty clear that only a regular, disciplined army could win this. So a new national army was forged right there in the heat of battle, under Colonel İsmet Bey. The very fate of the new nation was going to be decided here.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the big picture of generals and armies. But this war was really won by ordinary people who did the most extraordinary things. We're talking about the courage of a journalist, the defiance of a milkman, the unbelievable sacrifice of a mother. To really get it, you have to look at the faces of the resistance. Let's just take a moment and talk about some of these people, like Hasan Tahsin. He was a journalist in Izmir, not a soldier. But when he saw the Greek army landing in his city, he knew he had to act. He fired the first shot. It was a single act of defiance, but it was a shot that was heard all across the nation. It was a message: we will not go quietly. Then you have Suçu Imam in the city of Maraş, an unlikely hero if there ever was one. He was a milkman. When he saw French soldiers harassing local women, he didn't just stand by, he stood up to them. And his personal courage inspired everyone around him, igniting a fire of resistance that eventually drove the French completely out of the city. And nearby, you've got Şahin Bey. He was a militia commander tasked with defending the main road into the city of Antep. He was completely outnumbered, totally outgunned by the French army, but he refused to back down. For days, he and his small group of fighters held their ground, buying precious time for the city's defenses. They fought to the last man, but their sacrifice became a legend, a symbol of that fierce, unbreakable spirit. And this sacrifice wasn't just on the battlefield. The story of Sharifa Baji is just incredible. She was a young mother moving ammunition to the front lines on an ox cart during a brutal winter storm. When they found her, she had frozen to death. But her baby, who she had wrapped in her own blanket and tucked in with the ammunition to keep warm, the baby was still alive. Her story just says everything about the silent, immense sacrifices made by so many. So, fueled by all these acts of heroism, big and small, the tide of the war finally begins to turn. But here's the thing. This war had to be won twice. First on the battlefield, and then again at the negotiating table. That military victory was what gave them the leverage to walk into those international talks, not as a defeated power, but as a sovereign nation ready to dictate its own terms. And the end, when it finally came, was decisive. One last massive push, called the Great Offensive, drove the last of the occupying armies out of the homeland for good. The Armistice of Mudanya brought the years of fighting to an end. And then, after months of intense negotiations, came the Treaty of Lausanne. This was the big one. It officially recognized the full independence of the new Turkish state. And with that, on October 29, 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially born. So what happens when a people refuse to let their story be written for them? The Turkish War of Independence is so much more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a powerful story about hope, about courage, and about the unbreakable spirit of a people who, when faced with the end, chose a new beginning.